Hello there, and welcome to today's webcast, Budgeting Breakthroughs, How to Empower Public Sector Finance Leaders. I'm Justin Marlowe, a senior fellow with the Center for Digital Government and a professor at the University of Chicago, and I'm excited to serve as the host for today's webcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next 30 minutes. We do have a few housekeeping notes for you that are mentioned here on the screen. We will email a recording of this presentation to all registrants within 48 hours. Please use the recording for your reference, or feel free to pass it along to colleagues using the share widget on the console menu. So I'm pleased today to have this conversation with Cecilia McCorkle, who is currently a budgeting and implementation consultant at Unis Solutions. She has over 15 years experience providing budget and financial services to local government agencies, including 10 years leading budget development and finance management teams. Prior to her consultant role with Questica, she was countywide budget division director for Pinellas County, Florida, where as a customer, she managed the implementation of Questica budget. She's passionate about refining processes and leveraging technology to create operational efficiencies for organizations. Cecilia, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we wanted to start off our conversation here today with a little audience engagement. So we have a quick poll question for you. So you, the audience, feel free to chime in on this question. The question is, which of the following workforce challenges is a top priority for your agency? Which of the following workforce challenges is a top priority for your agency? A, how to address the varied tenure makeup of current staff. B, the values and skills needed in today's working environment. Or C, the tools and resources to support the changing landscape. So 3 related but separate ways of thinking about workforce challenges: how to address the varied tenure of your staff, the values and skills needed in today's working environment, or the tools and resources to support the changing landscape. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to chime in on that. Let's have a look at the answers. Oh, interesting. So 50% saying the tools and resources to support the changing landscape, 35% saying values and skills, and 15% saying addressing the varied tenure makeup of their current staff. Well, that's interesting. That's great to see, because we are going to touch on all 3 of these here today, and in a slightly different order than what we see there, but we plan to touch on all 3 of them at some point today. So great to know that we're on the same page as the audience here with what we'd like to get into. So Cecilia, just to get us started here, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got to where you are, and some of your experiences dealing with some of the challenges that we want to talk about here today.
Absolutely. So, like as you mentioned, I was with Pinellas County for several years, leading basically our budget development team, our Office of Management and Budget. So our folks are budget analysts who supported various departments, appointing authorities, constitutional officers, trying to pull all that together and create our budget, monitor our budget, assist departments in managing their budgets. And through all that, we had many organizational changes. We had larger staffing numbers, smaller staffing numbers, when we dealt with turnover, and just really trying to, readjust as you need to make sure your outcomes are there. So, and before that, I was with Osceola County, Florida. And there I did finance and compliance management, and also I worked and that was in Public Works, and I worked in the Office of Management and Budget over there. And at that point in time, I wasn't managing staff and OMB. I was a CIP budget advisor, but again, always dealing with turnover, new shifting priorities. So, and I'm sure everyone on this call has some sort of experience and challenge in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, maybe that's a good place to start with what we want to get into here today. So we're obviously, these workforce questions are top of mind for many. We've seen survey after survey talking about how difficult it is to fill the workforce needs in public budgeting and finance. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit from your experience a little more specifically about that. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing in managing and developing a workforce, particularly in the current economic climate, which in many ways isn't making it any easier to deal with that challenge?
No, you're right. There's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of years about these workforce challenges, public sector and private sector. Public sector is not recovering at the rate that the private sector was pre-pandemic. And I think, even before the pandemic happened, that we were having those challenges. So it's always been a challenge of some sort, but I think that just expedited it, and we're having a harder time getting back to what those levels were. And within these public organizations, we're seeing a lot of retirements. With new funding coming into organizations to deal with issues such as homelessness and housing, transportation, utilities. Is great when you get extra funding, but when you don't have the staff that can implement and manage those particular initiatives, it really causes a problem down the road. You want to do what's right for your organization, for your citizens with this funding that you receive, but it is very hard to manage. And then trying to do it with less staff and not create additional turnover as a result of overburdening the existing staff. There's so many different things, even from your lead-in poll that you asked. There are a lot of reasons for staffing challenges, and I recognize personally that I didn't have the authority to solve all of them as a manager, but there are things that we can talk about here, hopefully, that will give some folks some ideas and helping them understand some things that they can do to try to attract staff and then retain them. Retention's a big thing. Yeah, and those are what you mentioned before, the tenured and the generational gaps in employees, your values and your skills, and obviously those tools and resources that help them do their job efficiently and successfully.
Sure. Well, maybe to double click on that question around varying tenure of employees to start. So that certainly creates some unique challenges in and of itself when you have people who have been with the organization for different lengths of time. I wonder if you could talk maybe a little bit about that issue specifically, and what has been, what are the challenges, and what do you, from your experience, seems to help to address some of that?
Yeah. Okay. So, typically with your longer tenured staff, and versus your newer staff, many times you're going to see differences in generations too. So you're going to have a combination of things happening there. Right now, millennials make up the largest segment of the overall workforce, but still in public sector, the median age range is higher than in the private sector. So you do have folks in the public sector that have been there longer, started their careers earlier, and stayed with that organization longer. And I don't think this is just necessarily a recent trend, obviously, because these folks have been with the organization. When I started with Pinellas County, so that was about 10 years ago when I started, and there was already a push within the county to try to recruit a younger workforce. And that was because we had so much staff that was nearing retirement. They just encroaching on retirement within a few years. And it was a really important initiative to try to create some sort of succession management across the organization, not just in our budget and finance areas, but the entire organization. Because when you lose so much institutional knowledge, it really can set you back as an organization. Although new and fresh eyes always bring something forward too. So the organization really, that made it kind of challenging for me personally, and those newer folks that started with me, we had really evolved over time, especially like with technology, to be able to make this an easy transition. You have to remember, back 10 years ago, we were just a short time out of the Great Recession. So it seems like as soon as we get out of something and get comfortable, something else comes our way that makes it a little bit harder to keep progressing the way we want to. But also at that time, we were coming out of the Great Recession. Our budget office, when I started there, we were starting to take on new responsibilities that they hadn't in the past. So some offices were decentralizing their budget, others were centralizing their budget. So we had a lot of new staff starting in our office. So what became a challenge where we had very manual processes, and it was because we were working around some technology challenges, some gaps in technology. And our folks that have been there a while, they were okay with it. They had adapted to it. They developed the workarounds, so they were comfortable with it, but the newer folks in the organization, quite frustrated. These were very manual processes. Just to give you an example, we would export a budget and actual report out of our ERP financial system, but it wasn't drillable in any way. So you would have to pull a second report to pull the actuals information, the detailed actuals, and another report to see what your encumbrances were. And people were tying these together manually. So auto-generated reports, tying them together manual in Excel was just really not how it made sense to spend time. And it certainly doesn't develop your staff to really become good analysts to look at strategy. Then after a couple of years, we made a little bit of headway, but we had a change in leadership. And so that leadership that came in rightfully wanted us to spend time providing good analyses and focusing on the organization strategy and looking at efficiencies for the whole organization. Ironically, we weren't truly very efficient ourselves, but just trying to save money and be able to help do things better throughout the organization. So what ended up happening is, because of these antiquated processes we had, it just put the burden on our staff. It just became more time had to be invested by them to meet any of the outcomes we needed. And eventually people burned out, and they led to turnover. And, we get newer staff in, and they would see the same thing in a short period of time. They would find, they had seen more efficient processes in other organizations. They could tell that we weren't very efficient. So, you can learn from each other as an organization. But in that case, we were really struggling to get by.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine, just as a quick follow-up on that too, I can imagine that when newer folks coming into the organization experience some of those frustrations with those kinds of processes, it probably makes it that much more difficult for them to feel like they're actually part of the team, right? If you don't know this secret language or secret process workarounds that you mentioned, that would seem a big part of the challenge as well.
Right. And then sometimes you would get pushed back by the folks that had, like I said, that knew the workarounds, because they're feeling like a crunched upon, like, well, we're not doing things right. So what we did do to try to solve some of these challenges was actually put people together to help solve some of the problems. So we would have those folks that have been there a while, who knew the organization, who knew the technologies that we currently had, with newer folks who were, maybe very good with technology or had other skill sets that were very strong, and paired them up or put them in teams and challenged them with trying to help improve some of our processes. So things that we could have control of. And then that actually worked really well. They formed relationships that they may not have formed before. And also, I think, gained a respect for each other's experience and skill sets.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it would seem a great way to seize on the opportunity of having people with
exactly
within the organization. You alluded a little bit ago to what we often talk about as this kind of potential trade-off between quality and productivity. When you're forced to be doing that much more with those existing processes, or you're forced to have people who are maybe a little bit newer step into roles or take on workflow that might be a little bit new to them. There's always this concern about that balance between getting the work done and getting the work done well. What's your experience with that? And what comes to mind as ways to try to maybe strike that balance in a better way than we often do?
Well, I think importantly, you have to acknowledge that, for instance, sometimes you just need to invest more. And when we're talking about tools and resources a little bit earlier, sometimes you as an organization are really going to have to look at some of these technologies that are truly holding you back. Because what we had was very generalized technology. It just wasn't flexible. It wasn't built for what we needed it for. It was good. It was good technology. Our ERP was fine. Our budget technology was an extension of that, and it was not as flexible. So that was why we implemented Questica Budget. And it allowed us to take a lot of manual processes and remove them. We didn't have to do everything in spreadsheets, but if we did something in spreadsheets, there's the ability to connect directly to the budget system. So you're still not manually updating, you just refresh your data and bam. And so it's accurate, there's fewer errors. So really being able to improve on the technologies that we had, and then training. having your staff be able to train, not just the sharing of knowledge, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, as far as working together as a team with the folks, different skill sets, but specific organized structured training. So because when you have new staff start, they're very eager to learn. They want to know what it's going to take them to become good at their job, to grow in their role, to grow in the organization. And and having some sort of structure, being able to do something with that. Tell them, if you do this, you do that, you're growing, you're setting yourself up for growth. You're going to do better at your job. And I also encourage training at all levels. So what you would see is folks that have been there a lot longer, perhaps had kind of step back on going to trainings and participating in that. And I always felt like, we all can improve. We can all learn a bit more, and be able to, grow in ways that we, basically don't. Everyone has room for improvement.
Yeah, 100%.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, if I could go ahead. I didn't mean to.
No, I was telling you to go ahead.
Sure. So you mentioned workforce planning here a couple times now, and obviously it's very beneficial inside of a budget office. It's very beneficial as an internal process. Of course, taxpayers care if that can deliver results for the community, if that can deliver better budget outcomes, better community outcomes. You've been doing this long enough now to be able to have kind of that longer view on things. When, from your vantage, what's the connection between doing that kind of workforce planning and then the budget and community level outcomes that people really care about?
Well, so being able to look at that cohesively. So, so often those things are looked at completely separately, not intentionally, just because, you have people in different offices doing, you have folks over here that are doing, performance and strategic planning. You have folks over here doing your budget. They may be using different software. Who knows if they're talking to each other? But you really need to tie those things together overall to really have an impact, because really outcomes, we've been stuck in this do more with less, mentality, and that's internal resources, but that's also delivering to our public. But a lot of times what you see is just a continuation of what you're doing, and eventually it costs more, but you don't really know if you're being effective or efficient with that. So really being able to tie what you're spending and what you're planning to spend with your intended outcomes is ideal. And it's a hard process to follow, but some of these purpose-built technologies, like what we talked about, even Questica Budget, they allow you to tie these things together, where you develop that strategic plan, you develop strategic goals as an organization, then you identify your resources that can help you move those things forward, and then you tie that to your financials, and then you're able to see how impactful and if you're meeting your outcomes that you had hoped for, and also how much do they cost, or are they costing us a lot more than we should be investing as this? Is there a more efficient way of doing this? Do we need to shift priorities to something that we can achieve? So I think it all ties together, and then that's where the public sees. Really, those outcomes is what the public sees. They're very concerned about their dollar, but they're very much more concerned when they're spending, they're paying taxes, but they don't see outcomes in the areas that they're most important to them.
Absolutely. Based on everything we've talked about so far, what advice might you give someone in the position that you were in not that long ago, who's looking to deploy these technologies, who's looking to kind of improve their organization along these lines to deal with these workforce challenges specifically? What advice would you give someone who's dealing with those issues today?
Well, don't be afraid of change. That's always going to be my favorite motto. Don't get stuck in the way we've always done things, and don't assume that the price tag for something isn't going to be worth it in the long run. When we were facing that, I described a lot of our technology challenges that we had, and when we finally got to the point that we were ready to, let's look at something else that might meet our solution. We did an analysis of what it was costing to maintain internal infrastructure, to have consultants on hand, to have folks in IT, to have staff in our department. Looking at those overall long-term costs, we realized that it was actually investing in a new solution was going to be more affordable over the long term, and we were going to be able to make things more efficient, create more time for ourselves to do these other things that we really needed to be doing for our leadership and for our citizens. That really digging into looking at these this how our strategies and our outcomes and everything we're tying together, were we meeting our goals, being able to find efficiencies in other areas of the organization. So we really dug into that, but I would definitely go with the don't be afraid to change, and not just your technologies. That's just one thing I'm talking about. But when you talk about your skill sets, your values of your organizations, you hear a lot about flexibility with staff. I mean, that's one of the things that helps attract and retain staff. Be able to be flexible, and a lot of these technologies are cloud-based, so you don't have to be sitting at a licensed computer to do this. You can log on from anywhere. So there is some flexibility that you could afford to your staff. Even I get that not every job can be done remotely, but being able to give that flexibility to your staff so they can still do their job. They don't have to be sitting on a computer with a license on its desktop. You can log in from anywhere. You can collaborate with others in these systems where you don't have to be sitting next to them in an office. So there's a lot of forward thinking that comes with these technologies that supports your workforce, because people really are seeing that they want more work-life balance. They want to grow more. They want to learn more, and not be weighed down with just working around antiquated processes.
Yeah, 100%. I second the motion. Working with students who are going into this workforce, that's what we hear a lot of. Hear a lot,
Yeah.
a lot of emphasis on work-life balance, a lot of emphasis on making sure that the time and effort that they do put in is value added, and that they don't feel like they're being dragged with those with processes that feel antiquated or whatever it might be. No, it's really consistent with other experiences as well. So we're going to have some time here at the end for questions from the audience. So if anyone out there on the webinar would like to put a question to Cecilia, go ahead and enter that in the box, and we'll be sure to get to as many of those as we have time to get to. Before we do that, a couple other sort of things I want to make sure we wanted to get a chance to discuss, Cecilia. And one of those, of course, is, and you sort of touched on this a little bit, but I want to make sure we get into it specifically. You mentioned that purpose-built technology, like what we've talked about a lot here today. What role do you see that technology playing in empowering the budget workforce going forward? As we think about those particular technologies and the workforce challenges that we've talked about, what role do you see those two connecting on?
Well, like I said, and I probably have said it too many times, so I'll quit repeating myself, but efficient processes. So you can, before we had that, we had our budget system. It wasn't connected, and even though it was part of our ERP, it did not connect with our ERP. So we were doing things in Excel. We were using the budget system. We were using SharePoint. We were we had created an internal application because we needed a lower level of budget detail for analysis. So we had all of these people and all these resources, all for budget. That was just for budget development. So really being more efficient there, but also, like I said, collaboration among the organization, all your stakeholders, being able to collaborate within one software. It's very, they're often very intuitive. They're even with their external stakeholders, there are transparency sites that connect directly to this. So like with Questica's Open Book, you can create digestible, visualizations that speak to the citizens can better understand than your 900-page budget book that you may be printing for years. So it allows for transparency as well. And then, like I said, even cost savings over time, because you're not investing in all of these workarounds plus contracted services plus whatever else you have going on to support that. And one of the most important things that I felt like as in the role I was in was more accurate information, because all of these workarounds that you do have so much room for error. When you have things that are directly data flow direct between different applications, it's much more accurate, and you can feel more confident in what you're providing to your citizens, to your leadership when you're looking at budget. So when you're looking at actuals, when you're providing analysis.
Sure, absolutely. Terrific. Well, we do have a couple of questions. I'd encourage everyone tuning in, if you'd like to chime in with a question, go ahead. We can get to a few of them here in the time that we have left. One I think that jumps out right away, Cecilia, was you had mentioned a couple times doing more with less. And a question is, in your view, are we getting anywhere near the point of doing less with less? Are there limits on how much you can do, how much and how long you can do? Let's do more with less.
Overall, I'm sure there's some organizations who are getting closer, so I do not mean to dismiss those. It's a hard place to get. But overall, I don't really think we are. I think we get our hands forced into doing less with less, like when during a recession, during the pandemic, when you're not really sure what's going to happen. So we pull back, acknowledge that we're only going to focus on certain things. But I think the key to getting there is what we talked about a little bit earlier, which is really focused on your outcomes and finding efficient ways of doing things, because no one really wants to cut services. Like we're being asked for more as public sector than we were before the pandemic. So there are so many things, like I mentioned earlier, there's all these new roles being created with, and there's new initiatives to solve problems that are being, they're being asked for us to, for the public sector to be able to do this. So it's really hard to say, well, we're not going to do all of the services that you're asking for, or the ones that we've been doing that you really want us to keep doing. So it's really about finding ways to be efficient and looking at your outcomes, looking at the cost of doing certain lines of business, finding different ways of doing that might be more cost effective, and being able to achieve those goals, and shifting priorities when needed. But right now, I don't think most organizations, or a lot of organizations are quite there yet. But I think that's key, is really focusing on your priorities, looking at your outcomes that you're getting, and looking for the most cost effective, efficient ways of achieving them.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Kind of related to this, another question is around performance budgeting, or budgeting for outcomes, or budgeting for impact, or however we might want to think about that. Like, this is kind of a two-part question. Have any of the technologies that you've talked about here today, can they help with that? Can they help facilitate that? Can you integrate that into these systems? Mm-hmm. And then I guess beyond that, in your experience, does having that emphasis on impact and performance and outcomes, can that help with any of these workforce challenges as well? Does that change the conversation perhaps among budget staff?
So the first part, yes, the technologies like Questica Budget, that there is a strategic budgeting initiative with that, a module that can be implemented, and there's a performance module that's been in the system for years. So there is has always had the ability to tie them together. The strategic budgeting initiative is something that really ties it to your line item budget if you really wanted to, or even higher level. So that allows you to tie your budget, tie your actuals, tie your performance all together. So that it does, you know what you're budgeting for, and then you can look at your performance and your outcomes to see if you're making that mark. Sorry, the second part of that question was,
does having those kinds of tools help at all with these workforce challenges?
Yeah, I believe so, because again, you're being more efficient. You're being able to tie these things together, look at them as far as your budget and your finance staff. This less time they're spending on trying to find ways to tie these things together outside of that. And as far as the rest of the organization, they're able to see now, some of what it's costing to create these outcomes that they're being charged with doing. And it also should help them be able to, do analyses to see, can we do savings somewhere? Can we shift? Do we need to shift funding something else that's a higher priority? And then how are we going to make up for that? But, having these, when you're not spending all the time trying to tie it together manually, and you're able to do an analysis and dig into it, I absolutely think that helps, just sustain your staff, because again, we talked earlier about feeling like your time is value.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of valuable time, I'm sure we could go all day getting into this. Such an important set of topics, and your experience on it is so great to hear. But we do want to be respectful of everyone's time and make sure that we wrap up here at the when we're supposed to wrap up. So we'll leave it at that. In closing, again, just want to say thank you to you again, Cecilia, for a great conversation. Appreciate the chance to visit with you here today. And we also want to, of course, thank Unis Solutions for making it possible to bring this important discussion to you today. And then want to, of course, say thanks to you, the audience, for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you at another government technology event in the not too distant future. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks.